I'm Taisir Yamin, the director of the International Center for Innovation in Education in Germany. I am here in Stores, Connecticut, in order to meet our keynote speaker, Professor Reis, the Vice President of Connecticut University, one of the most well-known scholars in gifted education. I am very happy to meet with you today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here, and it's a pleasure to speak with the group today.
Thank you. Our first question, who are you?
Well, I guess like all women, all people, I'm many different things. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, I'm a professor, and for the majority of my life I've been engaged and involved in education of academically talented and high creative children and students. Most recently I finished, as you mentioned, a 6-year term as the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, in charge of a lot of the academics at the University of Connecticut. So like many other people, I hold multiple identities in terms of work and personal life. But now I am back to being, primarily for my work, I'm back to being a professor of educational psychology in the Renzulli Center at UConn.
And when did you start working in this field, and why?
Well, I think like many other individuals who became interested in education of gifted and talented students, I became interested in what to do with students that I had in my own classes. So my initial interest, believe it or not, goes back all the way to 1973. My first year of teaching, I was teaching in a high school. I had 6 classes of 8th and 9th. It was a middle school, but I was teaching the 9th grade in this grade 7, 8, 9 building. So I had 6 classes of 9th graders teaching them English. And like so many other people in our field, I encountered a student named Chris who was remarkably bright and extraordinarily advanced, and I just had no idea what to do with her. She knew all the answers before I asked the questions. She read all of the books the first week that I was giving them out in a 12-week unit, and I just wondered, what do teachers do with students like her? And that led me to some classes at the University of Pittsburgh, and eventually when I returned to my hometown, I went to college beginning in 1969, and I returned to my hometown in Connecticut to try to make a difference. It led me to starting a gifted program, and ultimately led me to the work of Joe Renzulli at the University of Connecticut. And that really began the rest of my life. You know, our work partnership, our personal partnership, but also the excitement of working with somebody whose work you believe in, whose ideas inspire you, and so it all comes back to having a couple of really talented students and not knowing what the heck to do with them initially.
Yes, very true. What are your most significant accomplishments and contributions at the local, I mean the American level and the international level?
Okay, so in terms of my probably the most important professional contributions, I would have to say, you know, I did a keynote at the World Conference a few years ago, and I was asked to think about this, and they probably fall into these areas. You know, the first is probably the research and all of the practical work that I've done, including the 3rd edition that we just finished a couple of years ago of the school-wide enrichment model. Yes. So that has been most likely my most important work and collaboration in the sense of school-based contributions. And with that, of course, I run and manage Confortute. So I've been doing that work for quite a while. I've loved the work on the school-wide enrichment model because I believe in it with all my heart. I believe schools should be places for creative, productive children, and that high creative children oftentimes are not well served by traditional school settings. So that would be the first area. The second, I think, would be my work on a component of that, but that is a standalone as well, and that's curriculum compacting and differentiation. Yes. I conducted I'm very proud of the fact that I conducted with my team one of the major studies on curriculum compacting and differentiation that led to one of the most cited statistics in our field, which is that we can eliminate 40 to 60% of regular curriculum content for academically talented students, and they do just as well on achievement test scores. So
Yes.
that's cited all the time in the literature. I'm proud of that. I think the third area is the area of social emotional development and the challenges children face related to social emotional development. I edited a book with 3 other colleagues. It was very popular across the world, and I've become very, very interested in underachievement and the reasons for underachievement. And that area is actually an area of great passion for me. The fourth area is probably the area that's most personally, in terms of my role as a woman, important to me, and that's the continuing dilemma of gifted girls and women, and why we don't have the means of helping more of them to achieve the highest level of their talent in their area.
Yes.
And I think those areas, I would say a fifth area has been my interest in twice exceptional children. That kind of falls into the social emotional, but that as a separate area. I conducted a couple of very important studies, to me at least, and continue to work in this area. I am invited to do keynotes often. I have a professional interest, but I also have a personal interest, because we have a daughter who was born prematurely and is both extremely bright but also has dyslexia. So the area of 2E, I think, continues to be an interest, and I'm very pleased to see it getting much more attention in the professional literature over the last decade or so. So those 5 areas are probably the areas that I've done the most work and I feel the most passion for.
Yes. And what competences contributed to your success?
Well, I think I have worked very hard, but I've also been very fortunate in that I work best when I feel passionate about something, and my passion for something usually comes from a personal interest. So my passion for the school-wide enrichment model came from actually implementing a program based on it in the early 1970s, early mid-70s. I implemented one of the first enrichment triad model programs in Connecticut, and then in the area in which I worked, 2 or 3 of my colleagues also implemented programs based on the enrichment triad model. I was the first place to pilot, my district was the first place to pilot the SEM. So for me, a personal interest and also a sense that I can, with the work that I do, solve a problem. So I love the work on 2E because I understand that if we can't do something to look at the talents and acknowledge the interests and talents of youngsters that are both talented and also have disabilities, that many of these young people will not only fail to excel in life, but also just not do well in school. So I feel like a personalization of the problem for me, and also in terms of my own life, I'm very task committed, I'm very determined, and I've had the blessings of a supportive environment, an incredibly supportive spouse, and really wonderful colleagues. If you really want to work on something that you feel passionate about, it's really important, I think, to have a support group. And for me, I like working with partners because I think having an exchange of ideas and keeping to deadlines and working with other people that challenge your assumptions is a really powerful way to do your very best work.
And why do you think that we have more women in gifted education than men?
Because there are more teachers that are women.
Yes.
Women tend, interesting, I do keynotes, as you know, on gifted girls and women, and I happened to do a session just a couple of weeks ago, and I said, if all of the gifted and talented women leave the field of education, I think the field would be decimated. There's so many more women that go into teaching, and for all the right reasons, and sometimes some of the wrong reasons, thinking it's like we were told in the 70s, it's a good career if you happen to have children. It is an incredibly challenging, difficult career, and I think the very smart women who not only enter the field but stay in the field are oftentimes the movers and shakers, and they understand what the loss of potential of all gifted and talented students, but particularly bright young girls that are not able to realize their potential. I think that's why so many women stay committed to the field of gifted education.
In addition to all what you mentioned as, your contributions at both levels, locally and internationally, also you work as an advisor. For some politicians, sometimes they approach you to get an advice. And do you think it has any impact, relating to decision making, relating to gifted education and investment in this field?
I'm incredibly disappointed that we don't have more politicians across the globe, not just locally in our states, our districts, but nationally, national politicians and leaders who don't understand the impact of having 50%, up to 50% of gifted and talented students are underachieving in school, 50%. In urban districts, in suburban districts, in rural districts. And the impact of that loss of talent on our society is shocking to me. And I don't just mean talent in the areas you would normally expect. I mean, we normally expect gifted and talented students to grow up and be doctors and engineers and lawyers and leaders, but this is in every area. And I want the most talented young people that are fascinated in communications to realize their talents. And I think that they're every single area of human performance and endeavor, the arts. If you even just think about the loss of talent in young people who are leaving education. So to me, it's been my greatest disappointment in life to see that more leaders, more politicians, more leaders are not interested in this top group of talented students, because we're losing far too many of them.
And when we talk about also social emotional problems of the gifted, we find you were amongst a very limited number of people who were doing research, writing, or authoring materials and resources in this area. Why?
First of all, more people should be doing research in the area.
Yes.
But it's because the constructs are so difficult to define. It's difficult to get a universally accepted definition of giftedness. It's difficult to get a universally accepted definition of underachievers. There's one of the dichotomies that's so interesting to me is that the whole notion of gifted girls. So let me give you an example.
Yes.
There are more gifted girls who graduate as valedictorians and salutatorians and top students more than ever before, but the numbers of women entering the top areas, how few women are leaders of their countries. I think 19 right now. I think of all of the representatives, ambassadors to the United Nations, there are only 30 women. If you look at the number of patents prior to the year 2000, women held 1% to 2% of all individual patents.
Yes.
I think now in the last 2 decades, it's up to 17, 18%. But even then, when 51% of our population internationally is women, why so few? Why so few women, in those areas? So I think defining the constructs is difficult. Understanding that underachievement for a gifted and talented student could be getting C's in high school so they don't get to a competitive college, so that they don't learn to work, and I think that's why fewer people are doing it. It's also very difficult because a lot of this work has to be qualitative. We can't just look at case studies of people that are psychologists. We can't just look at numbers. You have to look at why the barriers, why underachievement happens. There's many different forms of underachievement. So it's hard to identify easily and simply the constructs. And then, of course, the people that are doing it aren't really doing intervention studies. We don't know what works to reverse underachievement. We don't really know the best ways to try to develop self-regulation and task commitment and self-efficacy in students that are beginning to become less engaged in their work, which usually happens in upper elementary and middle school. So, I think those are the reasons we don't have more people doing the work, but they're also the reasons we need more people doing the work.
Yeah, true. Are there differences in priorities and profiles of gifted men and women?
Yeah, there are definitely very, very big differences. And, I think that it's such a complicated question because at any given point in a very talented woman's life, there are other priorities that tug at her heart. And so, you can, you make choices. The book that I wrote on this that I have to rewrite because it's out of print, the name of the book is called Work Left Undone, Choices and Compromises of Talented Women. And I think the most challenging question is always, the timelines and at what times that you can do the most work and the best work. If you want to live a balanced, happy life, the challenge that most gifted and talented females face is their whole notion of putting themselves last. So when you have a child, you put yourself last. When you're married, you put your husband's interest instead, or you have a partner's interest ahead of your own. And the very notion of individual talent development is that you have to put your talents at the forefront of what you do. And to do that and do that well means that sometimes you have to put yourself first. So I've, in my work, I've identified a number of external barriers and internal barriers facing very, very talented women. But having lived this life, I know that if the most important person in my life, my husband, is ill, he's going to come first. I know that my children, when they've needed me, they've had to come first. And so it's achieving balance. As you know, I've interviewed many, many talented women, and their profiles are different because women's creative focus almost always is more broadly dispersed. So women, while men tend to focus most on their work and their family, not always in that order, but often in that order, women's focus is much broader. A woman's focus oftentimes is her work, her children, her parents, her family, her friends, her home, her clothing, her creativity in terms of having her life be balanced, her spirituality. And so I have a theory that I've talked about called the diversification of talent theory in women. And I think that a lot of the single-minded focus that women might need to pursue their work and win a Nobel Prize or to write the great Pulitzer Prize-winning novel is difficult to achieve because they're caring for others, and the disbursement of their talents to multiple areas is always a factor in their lives. So, I've talked a lot about a later timeline for women, a timeline where when there's more time for their own work, a period that I'm in right now, and women in their 50s and in their 60s can have a more single focus because things in their life have changed a little bit. So I actually believe for highly creative women, their best time might be older age. And we may find in the future that as people live longer, that's actually a very good time for all gifted and talented people. But these are some of the ideas that I'm exploring right now.
This implies that women tend to sacrifice more than men.
I think women do sacrifice for others more than men do. And I think that the way they're raised is to put their own needs oftentimes as secondary to the needs of others. And so that in some ways conflicts with what you have to do as a gifted and talented individual pursuing your work. I think it's very, very difficult for women to turn their backs on things that they think are critically important, particularly at various stages in their life, when their children are young, when their husbands, again, need them for very, very important life decisions and life choices. But I also think it's your friends that need you, it's your parents that need you, it's the society. You think about all the volunteer work that women do. I mean, if women stopped volunteering their time and their energy and their creativity, much of what we need for the social fabric of a good life in our world would be lost. And yet women oftentimes do that without pay, without any attention, without asking anyone to notice that they're doing it. So I think women, again, oftentimes sacrifice their own ambitions and goals for the ambitions and goals of others and the betterment of the world, too.
Does that mean that you recommend women to be a little bit selfish?
I'd like to define it as not as selfish, but as understanding that if you're going to grow into a person that is happy with your life, you have to have some time to spend on things that you're passionate about. So what I say in the work that I've done on gifted girls and women is the saddest thing for me is to interview somebody who looks back at her life with deep regret. And the regrets that I hear from the older women that I've interviewed is almost always that they didn't pursue a passion, their work, with a little bit more time and intensity. So I can just tell you that I don't think my daughters or my husband had any difficult times in their life because I wrote a book or because I spent time doing something that I love for work, because I came back to them happier, more fulfilled, and when I'm happy with myself, I can be better at the other things I have to do in my life. So I do think the level of sacrifice that's needed for the ultimate success, like a Nobel Prize, a Pulitzer Prize, winning, and these awards, are only gotten by a very, very small number, but there are many, many more men who win them, and there are many, many more men who win all of the competitions, and again, all of the awards, and are presidents of universities and countries and leaders in every field. And I do feel that's because it's very difficult for women to live a life that's both personally satisfied and professionally satisfied. So the steps one takes, I think, is to take some time for your own talent development. And as you continue to stay active in your field with some time for your own talent development, then at the end, you may actually, later in your life, you may actually have more time, and at least you're still in the game. You're still working in your area of passion and the area you love to do.
But when we interviewed Nobel Prize winners, most of the time they say, I was made by my mother.
Well, that's an interesting thing. So in my conception of giftedness for females, for women, my female talent realization model, I actually define one form of giftedness, and it is a model that recognizes the work of Renzulli and Sternberg. It recognizes certain environmental factors and certain personal factors. But what I've actually found is that two things have to happen when all these things come together. One is that talented women have to develop a belief in self, and they have to have the desire to develop their talent. And those things are brought to bear in multiple areas. And one of the areas that I talk about is maternal giftedness. Einstein, Edison, many of the people that we recognize as the greatest creative contributors, Emily Dickinson, many of the women, many men, would not have accomplished what they did without a woman in their lives. Their mother, their sister, their spouse, their best friend, a partner. So I believe in maternal giftedness, family giftedness. If one of my daughters goes on to produce or create or develop something that changes the lives of others, I've had a part of that. I've contributed to that. And I think that's where you hear the Nobel Prize winners talking about their mothers, their partners, And certainly we know that's true of, again, some of the greatest scientists. Think of Edison and Einstein, what they would not have done without their mothers, their sisters, their spouses. So again, there's a lot of women who are part of the backdrop of talent development, and their roles are critical. And we need to recognize and celebrate those roles.
And Sally, even when we invite, parents to come for a meeting in order to discuss issues relating to their gifted children, most of the time you find mothers are coming.
Which is why I believe in maternal giftedness, and also why I believe so much in talented women staying in education. Their gifts and talents may go unrecognized by all but other educators and parents, but they're critically important. And again, if you look at the audience today and the audience at most gifted education conferences, there are many extraordinarily smart, talented women that are fascinated by this field because they realize they can be a part of helping to develop talents in others, and that's a wonderful role to have. It's a role I loved myself in my own life.
Yeah. When I met Robert Sternberg and other scholars, they always say that you and Joe make the right couple, and you are the most influential and successful couple. This makes me asking about what is unique about your approach of work, and what contributes to your international role and reputation.
I think what's unique about Joe and me, well, first of all, it's interesting because we've been married over 30 years. And many people in the field don't even realize we're a couple because I kept my previous name. But I think we're fairly selfless about each other. I've never had a moment of anything other than tremendous pride in my husband. I'm happy for every success that he has, and I think he's happy for my success. We know what we do well. We know the way we write together. We understand the way we work together. I think it was very hard for him when I took my 6 years off to become a leader at the University of Connecticut, but I can't really write about women leaders unless I've done that. Unless I've actually, you got to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And so we've always supported each other. We've always cared deeply about each other, and he's been happy that I have my identity, and I'm happy that he has his identity. We know each other so well, strengths, the way we approach ideas, and I am constantly amazed at his ability to continue evolving and wanting to evolve. And I think he's always proud of the work that I do, even if it's in a slightly different direction. But we come back to a core of having a family and having each other and believing, particularly in the work we've done on the broadened conception of giftedness, Joe's tremendous contribution, and then the school-wide enrichment model, which we've done together. So respect, pride, caring, and tremendous support for each other is I think why we are successful as a team as well as individually. I have to say though, it was also important for me to have an individual identity. So when people say something like, well, I didn't realize you were married to Joe Renzulli, I'm surprised, but I'm happy because I'm known on my own in the field.
Yes.
I think that's very important to my identity as a scholar and as a woman.
Yes. What are the most important paradigm shifts in gifted education?
Oh, by far, the most important paradigm shifts in our field are really the movement towards some of the things that we've been talking about since the 1970s. And I hope that doesn't sound self-serving, but if you really consider, project-based education, problem-based learning, in the United States we have Genius Hour right now. We're seeing so many more people adopt a broadened conception. When Joe first came up with the three-ring conception, he was ostracized in the field. He didn't get invited to conferences. He didn't get to speak at places. People rejected his article, because they said they didn't agree with it, and he was really ostracized in the field for a while. And I think now his success, our success, is really a paradigm shift. And you know, as he said, it takes a long time, but he sometimes doesn't acknowledge how courageous he was to come out against the sole use of IQ tests, for example, against a broadened conception, against looking at, I mean, if Joe hadn't included creativity in his original definition, I think the whole field would be different. And this whole notion of creative productivity and students actually being able to work on areas of interest, I mean, that's exactly where the field is as a whole right now, I think. And he and I were early pioneers in this. So again, not to sound self-serving, but I think the field has kind of come around to what the research has shown us, and that is when children and young adults can pursue their interests and follow their passions, they're happier, they're more engaged, and they're much less likely to underachieve.
Yes. What research excites you at the moment?
Well, as I've told you, I've stepped away from a very demanding administrative job, so I am considering rewriting my book on gifted girls and women. I'm really excited about developing a research project about creativity in women. So I wrote this article on women and creativity in the 1990s. That's one of the few that's out there, and it's amazing to me how many times people write to me about it. What I'd like to do is do a study of highly creative women and explore what creativity means to them, their creative processes. I think there's very little like that in the field, so that excites me. And I continue to be excited by the work I do with Joe. You know, Renzulli Learning was an early idea that I had relative to watching so many young people and so many teachers struggle with replacement activities for compacting. I am interested in personalized learning, and I continue to be interested in predicting creative productivity from young children to adulthood. I'm interested in what could we look for in children that might predict which students might need more services and what kinds of services we need to give students. But I think my first big study is going to be the study of highly creative, very talented women.
And I think, you know, based on your models, we are introducing up-to-date, personalized, individualized educational activities against the conventional, out-of-date, you know, curricula.
Yes. I think one of the biggest problems facing our field, now I will say internationally too, is still the difference between a teacher and state and national driven curriculum and a curriculum that makes more sense to the academically talented student. One based on, as Joe said for years, and I've said as well, his or her interests, his or her learning styles, his or her modes of expression. You know, we're still fighting upstream in that area. So I do think that Renzulli Learning is a huge step forward, but we need schools that are based on our notion of talent development. Schools should be places for talent development. Every single special education student in the world, on every IEP, individual education plan or program for every special education student, there should be some indication of their talents or their interests. If we had a goal, one goal for talent development for not only every 2E student, but every special ed student, you know, every child has a right to develop some of their talents and interests. And the gifted education pedagogy that we've developed at UConn and other places, to me, this could be the greatest enhancer of general education ever. We have the most exciting pedagogy in the world, but we're still not seeing it implemented in a lot of schools that do what their mission is, and that is drive more advanced information into the heads of children. The challenge is that those students don't always know how to use it, and they're not always interested in using it during the driving period, and some of them just get burned out. And also, we're not teaching them how to learn, we're teaching them stuff. And having them learn how to learn and how to solve problems and, you know, how to be a part of this great new society that we're all experimenting with and this information overload, these are really the challenges we face in the future. And particularly for students that master content in a fraction of a time that other students need to master it. What do we do with them? And that's where this whole notion of personalized learning and schools for talent development can really, I think, make the biggest difference.
You did a very impressive research study. It was like review for research available, and you came up with a very important number of implications.
Right.
What are the most important implications?
So I think you're saying, is there still a need for gifted education in our education system? Yeah, I wanted to do that for a number of reasons. One is I have people say to me all the time, do we really need gifted education anymore? You know, there aren't as many programs as there used to be, and you know, the answer is a resounding yes. And for some of the reasons I've mentioned today, when we know that in some urban school districts, up to 50% of gifted and talented students are underachieving, in rural areas or in countries that don't understand the needs of gifted students, there are no services. There are many, many smart kids that will fail school, drop out of school, not find an interest, not find a passion, not do well, and these are critical issues. We have very little knowledge of what to do with bright kids when they finish the regular curriculum in a fraction of a time. We know that gifted and talented students, now, as a whole, they generally have as good of a social and emotional development as do other students. That is, they don't have more problems. But if they have problems, they're critical problems, such as underachievement, such as perfectionism, such as high anxiety about the world and their role in the world. And we have very, very few places that even know or understand the social emotional concerns. The other thing we need is longitudinal research. We need a better understanding. And Joe and I have carried out some. Many of our colleagues and people that have done their degrees with us have done studies of longitudinal impact of programs. We know some of the things that make a difference, but we're not seeing enough of this being done. So we need these programs. We need to do more research on these programs, and there's still a critical need, you know, particularly for students who don't have support at home or at school. Now, there are some bright kids that are going to do very well. They're going to grow up, they're going to be doctors, they're going to be lawyers, engineers, they're going to be professors, but I'm not sure that without what we know, they're going to be as creative or curious or invested in solving the problems of the world. You know, Joe and I have always believed that gifted and talented students and kids with high potential should be the ones that we entrust the knowledge and the understanding of what to do to make the world a better place. And even just a simple study, you know, like Bob Sternberg's been doing, Howard Gardner's been doing, and Joe's been doing, of how people can use their talents to improve the human condition, that's important, because we need to know what it is we can do, what kind of triggers we can do to convince talented young people not to use their talents to make a lot of money, but rather to use their talents to make the world a better place. These are critical issues, and that's completely needed still in our field.
How could we get more potentially gifted people in teaching profession? Well, because this is like very critical issue, you know, when it comes to gifted education.
We can make teachers more leaders. We can give them more autonomy. We can give them more choices. We can take away, you know, the administrators who don't understand this area. We can have, you know, visionary superintendents that understand that when smart people enter the teaching field, they need to be able to make some choices of their own. They have to have things they can do that they feel passionate about. It's one of the reasons Joe and I love doing Confertute in the summer, is we get so many passionate, highly creative teachers that say, I was thinking of leaving teaching until I came to your summer institute. It's just a week, but it just encourages and gives people hope about going back into their profession with new and creative ideas. I think teachers need more autonomy, more freedom, and more support for their own creativity. And I think in many places we're doing the exact opposite of that, unfortunately.
We consider you as a role model in gifted education. So what is your advice for young scholars, young researchers?
That's a very good question. But my advice for young scholars and young researchers, I think particularly at this time, is to find something that they feel passionate about. You should do research on things you believe in. You know, when I felt so lucky in my life that I was able to do, we had the funding from our National Research Center to do a really good study on compacting. But even before I had the money for research, and we had the money from the government in the U.S., I did things I was passionate about. I spent years on my gifted women study. I spent a long time on the 2E study, interviewing students at universities that had learning disabilities and looking at the paths that they took and the things that what they encountered, the obstacles they encountered. So I think you have to, first of all, find your own interest. I think secondly, I've been blessed with great partners. So having people to work with that will challenge your assumptions, as I said, and inspire you to do well. I've been blessed to have that in Joe and my friend Susan Baum and my partners at UConn, Del Sigley, Jean Gubbins. To find somebody you can write with, I think always gives you an added benefit of different perspectives, and somebody, again, challenging your work and ideas and findings, which has been very, very helpful. I think also finding schools to work with. There are a couple of dozen schools that welcome Joe and me, schools and districts, because they know we do ethical research, we do it well, we keep our promises. But we started small. We started doing some of our work in our daughter's school. We started in the school district in which I was working. I have a background as a teacher. I was a gifted program coordinator. So I think to develop a relationship with a school where you can do your very best work for that school, keep your promises. And I guess last, I would say that do something that you feel is going to have practical importance and meaning. Every study that I've done is something that my work, for example, my most recent work, an outgrowth of SEM, has been on talented readers. And there's so little out in the field on talented readers that I felt I could make a difference to parents, to teachers, to students themselves. So to do something that you feel has practical significance, will make a difference in schools, that's guided our work and my work as well.
And if they are lucky enough, they will have like a very healthy, supportive atmosphere,
yes,
as the one you have here at UConn.
Yes. We've been very blessed to work at the University of Connecticut. We've been blessed by our donors, Ray and Carol Neag. We've been blessed by the university. It's given us an environment where we could bring in the kinds of research, but also run our summer programs and our student programs. So yes, finding an environment. But I do want to say that even before I was at UConn as a teacher in a school district, getting an advanced degree, I had a curious spirit, and I was always interested in doing research. So if you wait till all the conditions are perfect, you won't do it. I think starting small and then working up to studies that are more national and have more impact, but starting doing something is really critical. Find out where your own students are. Ask your students on a regular basis, is what you're doing making you happy? Why are you struggling with this? What's going on that you're not able to complete something? That actually helps a lot of underachieving students because it begins the process of metacognition. So you can do action research studies even in your own schools and districts if you have willing, supportive administrators and people around who understand the importance of the work you're doing.
So at the end of this interview, first of all, we are so proud of you,
Thank you.
your successes, and I would like to thank you so much on behalf of the organizers of this conference, and I would like to give you a few minutes to conclude this interview by some suggestions or recommendations you would like to offer or to introduce.
All right. Well, thank you. First of all, thanks for your friendship. As Joe said, we have many of our international opportunities and our connections have been because of the work that you've done. We've also been blessed by our partnership with Victor Muller and Salome Oppenheim in Switzerland. Salome and Victor have been dear friends. But a lot of our European work and our international work has brought us tremendous joy. So we are also very grateful to you, and we wish you and everyone in the audience a Happy New Year. And I guess I would just conclude by saying that when you find something that you love and you have a passion in your field and a passion for ideas, you're never really working. You're always lucky. If you're lucky enough to have your work be something you're passionate about, you don't really work. You follow your passions and you do what makes you happy. I've been blessed by being married to and working with a man who loves his work just about more than anything else, maybe except for me and our children. But I've had a great role model in that, and I wish for everybody an opportunity to find work that they love, and then to ask some questions about that work, and again to carry on their own small studies, because then that actually adds to the knowledge and continues people working in a positive vein. And I would say to the women in the audience today not to give up on their dreams. Too many talented women defer their dreams. Too many, 70% of all people in the United and in the world that are illiterate are women, and women are the greatest single contributor to the largest group of people in the world that are poor, and we need the talents of women to be recognized. So if I'm speaking to somebody in the audience that might have a dream to go on and get a doctorate and pursue, or an advanced degree, a master's degree, and pursue work that's very important to you, your school, your state, your district, your country, go do it. Don't wait. Because I've interviewed far too many people who look back with regret that they didn't. Taking safe risks every once in a while to do something that's out of the box and that makes you happy personally will also have the people that you love understand that talent development is important. And my guess is that many of these young people with dreams will be encouraged by those they love to pursue them, and I'd certainly like to encourage them now. So if you get an idea and you want to do something, I think you have to go do it, and don't dream about it, but rather take the steps to put it into action. That would be my advice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.